And then last week we had the newest member of the Miami-Dade School Board, who's actually a Georgetown graduate, come and kind of talk about that end of policy. We're trying something different out this week, and I'm really excited because Anna's a colleague of mine. She's an associate professor in the psych department. But if I'm right, you have 2 degrees, one in psychology and one in public policy, because you're overachieving like Georgetown students who insist on double majoring in things. So we've got 2 degrees coming in here. And research is on looking at impacts of kind of public policies and policies around education, but how it really plays out in students' lives, particularly low-income students' lives. And if I'm right, a lot of your research actually looks at issues about food security. And you've been doing some really cool work this year in the pandemic and looking at the consequences of the pandemic on top of all of that. So I had the good fortune for one weird week, and you'll appreciate this. I never read emails that come from our university, but I actually read one of the college missives, and it was about your research. And I thought, well, dang, that would be awesome to have you come and join us at this. So I'm just thrilled that you're here, and I'm going to be quiet and get out of the way and let you talk. And other folks know, but for Tanya and Carla, this is also, feel free to drop questions in the chat. Feel free to unmute. The whole idea here is to have kind of an informal and engaged conversation. So welcome aboard. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And so I'm really interested in hearing like what you guys want to know. I'll tell you a little bit about what I do so you can like think about questions that make sense. But you know, I'm most interested in like a back and forth and not just a forth. So my name is Anna, and I'm a professor, like Heidi said, at Georgetown in the psychology department, but I do have 2 degrees. I have a PhD in child development and a master's in public policy. And what I've always wanted to do in my work, and what I do is ask like policy questions. Like policy questions are like, does it work? That's a policy question. Like, does this policy work? They're not like theoretically complex, like pie in the sky, you know, basic science questions, which are really important. They're not like theory driven. They're just like, do food stamps help kids be less hungry? Does preschool help kids do better when they get to 1st grade? You know, like these sound like really no-duh questions, but like actually you have to have really rigorous social science research behind public policy. That's the only way that policy moves forward, expands, gets funded, doesn't die, et cetera. So I really do ask a lot of these really applied questions, and I focus a lot on food insecurity and also early education. Those are my 2 like areas of policy. Those things affect directly, obviously, low-income families. I've always focused on low-income children, usually like 0 to 6. I'm, you know, focused on kindergarten readiness, getting kids ready for kindergarten, acknowledging that there's a income-based achievement gap that appears as early as kindergarten. So that's like the child development side. But then, you know, once kids get to school, what happens to them? So I've started to focus on teachers and the stressors that teachers experience, and recognizing that a lot of teachers are parents themselves. Some of you may be parents. Many of your colleagues might be parents. And for low-income households, you know, a teaching salary, this will be no surprise, does not necessarily guarantee that you're not going to be in poverty, particularly for the only wage earner in the household. So my research on low-income families and children has kind of led me into a place of school-based, both teachers as parents, teachers as individuals who could benefit from public policies, schools as places that deliver programs to kids and families, and those programs include education as well as food support. So that's kind of like the broad focus of my research, like what works to support low-income kids and families, what works to support the teachers who are supporting the kids, and the teachers themselves might be parents in low-income households, and how can public policy make those things better, stronger, longer lasting. So that's kind of what I do research-wise, and I do it right now with a lot of big data collection projects. I have a big project in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a project in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with slightly different focus areas, but they're both embedded in schools, both of the research studies. So the one in Tulsa, Oklahoma is following kids from age 3 through 4th grade. So they're in 2nd grade right now. We've been following them since 2016. So that's a study the kids are all in the public elementary schools in Tulsa. It's a 82% low income population in the public schools there. It's very diverse. It's like 56% Latinx, nearly 30% Black. We've been, like I said, those are low income kids who we've been following since they were 3 years old. And so we interviewed their teachers, their school administrators, their parents, and then we give the kids a bunch of cognitive tests every year. And then in the study in Pennsylvania, it's a school-based food assistance program where kids take backpacks of food home, and we text message their parents every night asking, did you get the food? Did you make the food? Did you like the food? And then like, how did it change your behavior? Were you less hungry today than you were yesterday? Did you yell at your kid yesterday? Did you yell at your kid today? Did your kid seem cranky yesterday? Does your kid seem cranky today? And trying to understand, like, does the cranky go down? Does the yelling go down when the food goes up? So I'll stop talking just for a second. I know that's like a lot, and you guys can just say like, but wait, do you do this? Because what I'm really interested in this, and I can tell you if I do or do not do that thing. Maybe I do.
I teach one section, it's called Social Justice in Food. Fascinating research, and I want to hear your findings on the pandemic, but also I was wondering, have you ever done any research about the impact of like a community agriculture program has on the diets of students?
No, I haven't. There is a lot of research on that, like on CSAs and like, community food, community gardens and community like farmers markets that accept food stamps and WIC benefits and things like that. I have looked at food deserts, but defining deserts using like the Census Bureau's definition of whether a certain, area has X number of grocery stores and Y number of bodegas, not taking account of more like the agricultural space.
Wait, Gavin, I have to ask you now. Sorry. So do you have, I mean, is that something that is popular in the communities that you draw students from? Is that something that the school has going? Is that?
So it's a program we have at school. We have about 4 sections now. A colleague of mine, she created it and she brought me on, and we maintain a community garden. Ironically, the purpose of the garden is to get the kids off of tech. So this year, like, our objective kind of wasn't really met. We're excited that we're starting to get to go back now. But yeah, it was really just kind of teaching them about the impact of, quality food compared to just, the double cheeseburger at McDonald's. The kind of almost the relaxation part of gardening, just digging in the soil. We focus on a wide spectrum of students, not just your AP students. It's mostly a lot of students with, we have a social emotional disturbed population at our school, and they really benefit a lot from it.
Ryan had a question in the chat about like what works to get kids to eat healthier foods. And like, I wish I knew. I have 2 young kids, and like they're upstairs eating like pasta with butter and Parmesan cheese for like the 4th night in a row. I think that obviously like a necessary but not sufficient first step to getting kids to eat healthy food is making healthy food available, which means both making it accessible and affordable. And so that's, without that, you don't have a prayer, right? So like I offer my children healthy food. Like there's also a plate of cauliflower up there. Like, will it be untouched when I go upstairs? Probably. But you have to, that's expensive, right? So like, this is also like a no-duh kind of area, but it's one that is worth mentioning and worth documenting, which is healthier food costs more. And if you're a low-income household on a tight budget, like you're going to want to get the most bang for your bucks that you're putting towards food. And are you going to go to the McDonald's drive-through, which I just went to on a drive with my kids, and realized that I could get like hamburgers, French fries, and milkshakes for everyone for the amount of money I would also spend on like 1 head of broccoli and 1 head of cauliflower, which they may not touch, and I may end up throwing it away. So if I have a limited budget, am I going to spend my money on food that my kids may or may not eat that's really expensive, or the food that's definitely going to go into their stomachs? They're going to sleep better that night. And yeah, it's not very good for them. So I don't know, Ryan, it's such a tough question.
I just a small follow-up on that. I feel like it's kind of similar to like the Dollar General versus Costco problem, where I watch students. I said I work in New York City, specifically in Harlem, who come to school every day with a black bag of probably $5 to $6 worth of stuff from the local corner store. We call them bodegas. Bacon, egg, and cheese, a drink, a chips, and some type of candy, and usually a breakfast. And I don't think that my lunch, what I bring, which is usually leftovers, costs $6 a serving. That would just be my guess. And so because I buy it sometimes in bulk from Costco, foods, but also just from the grocery store, and I plan things out, and that one head of broccoli that might cost like $2 or whatever, $3, is then used over 2 or 3 meals. And I just feel like there is that's what's so frustrating to me, is that I'm watching students spend so much money a week, their parents' money ultimately, at bodegas on lunch. While yes, we have a free lunch program, every single student at our school is free and reduced lunch. And I just, that to me is where there's this disconnect of like eating, because obviously the foods they're eating, the bodega, bacon, egg, and cheese, is horrible for you. But also just expensive. Like it isn't ultimately always cheaper. It's they're spending a lot of money on convenience, just like if someone does it at Dollar General, in a place where Dollar General takes advantage of not the best stuff, but takes advantage of lack of other stores. Whereas if they could go to Costco, yes, there's more of an upfront cost for 20 things of toilet paper, but ultimately it's cheaper per head. I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's
You're totally making sense. I mean, I just want to say I lived in New York for 12 years, and like I love a good bodega bacon, egg, and cheese, and I know it's not that healthy, but like there is an actual
a Friday
egg in
night
there
or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but not every single day.
Yes, no, clearly not. And you're right, that is expensive. And so this idea that it's also expensive to go to McDonald's drive-through multiple times a week. Like that's more expensive than making your own food and making a double batch and saving it. What's the trade-off? I mean, there's time costs, right, for parents. And so one of the things we learned to get to the data is from the study in Pennsylvania where we text message families. So that's a backpack food program. And I can't remember if it was Kate. I was looking really quickly at the chat. It was Kate who said, increase in unhealthy food, working at the distribution center that you worked at. So the backpack food program in Pennsylvania that we're looking at is a program that they call themselves informally, not to the families who receive it, Blue Apron for low-income households. So it's fresh, unprocessed food with a recipe card that comes with it. And the recipe card has items that sum to no more than $7. So the idea is the family could recreate the recipe if they like it and stay within a pretty limited budget, right? It's a really innovative program. This is why we're working with them. It's the only one of its kind that we know of in the country. And what they do is they send home bags of food every Thursday with the kids who have signed up for the program. It's called Power Packs. And the problem, so we text message families and we started by asking, like, do you like the food? Do you use the food? And what we found in that particular area is very race, ethnic diverse. There are a lot of Latinx families, but there are also a lot of families who are kosher. There are families from households that observe for religious reasons. They don't eat meat. So that makes it a little more challenging in terms of like getting the protein in there. There are households that for allergy and or like other dietary reasons don't consume dairy. So sending home like a big gallon of milk, which is innovative for a food program, is not going to work for some families. And then a lot of the families reported one of the barriers to cooking the food was they didn't have basic cooking implements. So they were lacking like a paring knife and a fry pan. And so if the recipe called for like sauteing something, they were like, no, I'm going to have to hack this and do this other thing with it. And a lot of the families, as many families are very resourceful and could still make use of the food in a way that was healthier than going to a drive-through. And they did say, Ryan, interestingly, in one of the questions we asked them, that they did make the food last over multiple meals. So you're right that like home cooking a meal, and it's a big grocery bag that goes home every Thursday. And it's scaled for the size of the family. So if there are more than 4 household members, they get 2 grocery bags automatically. If there are 4 household members, they get 1. So there's an opportunity to make the food stretch a little bit. I think there are just some really real barriers. Even if you cross the access and affordability barrier, the next one is, do they have the right tools? Does the food match their dietary needs, preferences, and a cultural match?
Fascinating. Thank you.
That's a really cool program. When you said backpack program at first, I was thinking of things I've heard of where they just, send home prepackaged food with the kids. Me said Blue Apron, that blew my mind that there's a program doing that. I think that's so cool. This is similar food in schools, but slightly different. I know my son's school's been having, like, there's a federal program this year to cover students' lunches. I think because of COVID. Is that something that's happening? Have you, I don't know if you know anything about that and how that's affecting schools or child hunger in general. It's a very vague, broad question, but I was just curious whether that's had any impact that you've been able to see as a policy this year.
Yeah, I think that so what we've seen in so we ask about food insecurity. We're kind of looking at food insecurity in both the Oklahoma study and the Pennsylvania study, although the rest of the studies aren't particularly overlapping, except that they're based in schools. The answer to your question, I think, is that, so we saw a spike in food insecurity right after COVID when schools closed and people were kind of scrambling, pantries. It was unclear about even just the health protocols about how did you access food when you'd been accessing it one way and then all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under you. But once schools in particular got their sea legs, and like one thing I want to say, and I was interviewed, I did an interview with NPR in the late fall about these studies and about this kind of question. And one thing I said there that I just want to repeat here because the audience is much more relevant is schools are the lifeline, like during this pandemic, like no doubt. And I think it's really shitty, excuse my language, that like we're in a country where your choice is like go to school and risk getting sick with a virus because it's your only way to get food and mental health services, which is true for many of these households, or stay home, stay safe from the virus, but you see this massive increase in student mental health concerns and lack of access to food. So I think that schools rocked it, like from both in, and I'm sure people have issues with their own administrators in their own districts, but on average, what we saw in Oklahoma and Pennsylvania was that food insecurity increased for like a very short period of time. And as soon as schools got their sea legs, it went down. Parent depression increased and kept going up. Parents were freaking out, right? For many reasons, valid reasons, particularly Latinx, you know, Black and brown parents communities were hit harder during the crisis. Very real reasons to fear for their health, very real reasons to feel for their children's health. So parent depression, parent anxiety kept going up, didn't go down again. But food insecurity went up and then went down. And I believe it's because of exactly the program you're talking about, Tanya, which is that the federal government figured out how to give additional vouchers to schools so that free lunch programs that used to be served meals in schools pivoted to be backpack programs, grab and go meals, partnering with food pantries, making food available, making schools what like churches in the African American community were in the 1960s, like hubs of the community where you go to like find your people and find your resources. And that's what we're hearing from like a lot of these families and a lot of the teachers and school administrators. So again, I don't want to generalize. I'm certain as educators, you have many, many, many things that were not working well in your communities. But one thing that worked well, at least in the places that we're collecting data, is that schools were lifelines for these families because of those food programs. Yeah. Okay, someone help me keep up with the chat. Hi Emily. Okay, time cost of food prep. There's a lot of hi Emily. I'm just adding on.
Actually, while we regroup from the chat here briefly, Emily, do you just want to? Everyone gave the usual kind of name, rank, and serial number introductions here.
Sure. I'm Emily Byrne. I'm in Minneapolis. I teach at a Cristo Rey school, and I teach 11th US history. And so thank you for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Something that was interesting that's happening at our school is, so we're going to bring our students back, and we've been able to give families a $250 voucher every month because since their high school students are not in school, we were able to use that federal money and give it back to them. But if their student comes back, they don't get it anymore. And a lot of parents are like, I'm actually getting my whole family's groceries from this voucher, and it's making some students not want to come back to school because they're worried it's going to take away from the grocery bill from their parents. So that's kind of a sticky situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, we call that a perverse incentive in policy world, where you're giving people benefits they desperately need. And like, when is it ever a bad thing? I'm sorry, like to give a family more food. Like I'm like, they might be getting double food. It's like, probably they need it. Probably they're not selling it in exchange for something else. Probably they actually need food. Some of them are maybe doing other things with it, but like, I just think it's not a bad thing to give families double food vouchers during a pandemic.
Yeah, and I heard earlier too that, you know, schools act as this hub and distribute things. Does it make you think, especially for older kids, like, would it be more beneficial to host vaccination sites at high schools so that like students didn't have to travel and find, you know, I think about that where it can be really difficult. A lot of my kids, their families don't have cars. Like it would be so great if we could do it at our school. And maybe there would be some positive peer pressure to get the vaccination too. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that would be great. I just heard a story on the news the other day. I don't know if you guys heard this. I think it was in Wisconsin, I want to say, that this gentleman has opened up his barber shop as a vaccination site, and it was so popular with older African American men in his community because that's who comes to get their haircut. Again, another community hub of like, you go, you check in with your people, like that's how you get your news, like that's the place that you go to connect. People were getting their vaccinations there, and it was so successful that he started partnering with like a local healthcare clinic to offer like blood pressure checks, diabetes screenings, and like other basic healthcare for a subpopulation that typically like doesn't have easy access to medical care. And I feel like schools, again, like that's you know, barbershops for older men, that's one demographic. Schools for younger children, is it making that a place where you do the vaccinations. I mean, I don't know, I've heard two of you mention Cristo Rey schools. I don't know what that is. I know 21st century schools and communities. I don't know if that's the same program or different. No, what is that?
I'll explain. So
because you're the second person.
Oh yeah, right. Yes, Ryan and I are partners in crime.
Yeah, on Jesuit connection here, Georgetown.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I know. Sorry, I'm Jewish. I don't know anything about anything.
No, it's a network of 38 schools for low-income families, so who can never afford like a private Jesuit education. So all students have an internship one day a week. So like all my juniors work on Mondays, and then return the businesses pay for their tuition. So they have like incredible resumes, better than mine by the time they graduate, like real world experience, and they're earning their way through high school.
Wow. I've never heard of that. Is it nationwide? 38 schools, you said?
There's one in DC. It's called it's outside of DC, in Maryland. It's called Don Bosco.
Okay.
High school.
So they're religious schools. They have to be.
Yeah, it's a Catholic network.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So we actually, it's a relatively small network, Anna, for us to have 2 teachers in this network. I'd say the reason we have 2 is that because it's a Jesuit network and we're Jesuit, we get a lot of students from Cristo Rey applying to Georgetown, and they're almost all low income and first gen students. And I think as is demonstrated here, they have exceptional teachers who are really committed to their students.
Well, so the other reason that this is all foreign, so I have always focused research-wise on little kids, right? So I don't know the oldest I've ever done is 4th grade. And so this to me is a whole new world. Like I only know, and I said this to Heidi when she invited me, I said, oh my gosh, my worlds are colliding because, you know, I've just had this revelation, like dummy that I am in the last few years, that I'm like, wait, my whole research career, even when I was in graduate school, is focused on what can we do to get low income, who, as we know in this country, are disproportionately Black and brown children, low income kids, into high quality preschools, get their bellies full with the right kinds of foods, get them doing the best, reaching their full potentials. And then it's kind of like ... And now I've been at Georgetown for a couple of years. And on the Georgetown side, I'm very involved with the Community Scholars and GSP program, which is our Georgetown Scholars program, first generation students. And like, I just had this moment a couple of years ago where I was like, oh, the whole point of everything I've been doing is to get the kids ... so that they can go to a college, not necessarily Georgetown, but like a place that serves their needs and supports their dreams, like duh. So this is a whole new world for me, and I've only just figured out that those 2 things are connected, you know, in the last couple of years. And so I'm not familiar with the Cristo Rey program, but that I mean, that's my list. That's so amazing. I love that. I hope you feel it's successful from the
These
inside.
folks are all the ... here, Anna.
Yeah.
These are the people who are getting them between that program and Georgetown.
Yeah.
Hey, Tia Wanda, welcome aboard.
Hey, everybody.
Tia Wanda, Anna's our guest for today, but everybody's been introducing themselves a little bit. Do you want to do the usual?
Oh, sure. Hey, Anna. My name's Tia Wanda, and I am a teacher in North Carolina with Quality Education Academy. And this is my first year there. For 5 years. I was at Dudley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina. Now I'm about 30 minutes away from the school that I taught at for 5 years. And I hail from the city of Chicago. I was there for 20 years in and out of school buildings there. In the nonprofit world for intervention and prevention services for adolescent youth on the south side of the city. So I spend my time chasing Ray and Bay in them for 20 years. And and then I returned back to the formal classroom and still chasing them in the classroom, trying to make sure that they're college ready. So it's good to meet you. Thank you so much for devoting your time to us this evening, Anna. Look forward to hearing more from you.
I mean, I just feel like I have so much more to learn from you guys than you guys have to learn from me, honestly. I mean, I'm interested in all the questions you're asking, and I have some answers and maybe, not others, but like, I really want to know what can we do? I mean, I don't know, Heidi, I'm assuming you went to that talk that was the, I forget what they call it, like the fall convocation speaker, who was the president of the community college system, LaGuardia Community College in New York for 22 years. Yeah. I thought she just blew it up in like the best possible way. Like, I'm not sure Georgetown knew what they were getting at that talk. I thought it was fantastic.
I think Jack actually knows her pretty well, but yeah, she was blunt in speaking with Georgetown faculty, refreshingly blunt.
And I thought it was amazing. So she talked about like the bridge between a 2-year college and a 4-year university like Georgetown, and what happens when they send their most inspired and inspiring and motivated students to Georgetown. In many cases, they don't succeed necessarily, and what kinds of basically put the blame at the 4-year institution, and said, you not you specifically Georgetown, but just any 4-year institution that has funding and endowments and all these things, like you need to build that bridge, like make it stronger, make it more welcoming, like. And so I thought that was really inspiring, and that was like 3 months before everything closed down for COVID. And so I had a couple of meetings with deans at Georgetown to say, like, well, what do we do with this? Like, I want to do something with this information. Like, let's build that bridge. And then, everything went to Zoom, which made it just a lot harder to like start to meet people. Like, it's hard. And maybe Jerome, you have some thoughts on this, and maybe others who've like helped launch students to 2-year and 4-year colleges have thoughts on this. But like, I don't know how do you reach out to these students without targeting them in a way that feels inappropriate. That's one thing that like I feel is, because sometimes the students who need help the most are the least likely to ask for it. I'm sure you guys have all seen that. And students have told me that, like, directly. They say, I'd rather come talk to you in the summer when I know there will be no other upper income white students who have all the answers in your office right before me. Like, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to sit in your office hours with another student, because it makes me feel like I can't ask my questions. And so I'm not going to come to your office hours, and I'll come over the summer, maybe. And like that kind of stuff. It's like, how do you reach a student without, like, I don't know. This is what I want to know from you guys.
One thing that I've seen, and one thing actually, this a similar question came up last week with Luisa Santos, talking about how do I reach out to thinking about how do I better support my undocumented students. And one piece of advice that she gave, which I thought was really rich, and when I look back to the teachers that I connected with the most, or the professors rather, are the ones who put it up front in front of everyone early on, right? So how do you, being vulnerable and transparent in front of the whole class. So I don't know who's in this demographic who needs to hear this, but this is part of who I am, part of my policy, part of how I do business. And every time I was in a classroom where the professor was that transparent, I was like, oh, okay, because transparent to me equals trust. And so that quickly translated into that. And so I was able to kind of cut through trying to figure out who this person is, where they lie, what type of vibe, what type of energy they're on, because they're very upfront and transparent. And one thing I think, this is true in any industry, every situation, it's hard to talk about what people don't want to talk about, right? But for students like with my identity, not talking about it can be detrimental. And I'm left to kind of make stories and interpretations in our own heads that leads us down the wrong path. So yeah, I think Luisa's advice on just same way of dealing with, like, hey, I have these resources, these are things, I'll keep it confidential, these are things I have in front. And I think that also sets the tone for the students who come from privilege to check, oh, wow, there is something that maybe I need to be doing as well to kind of foster this space that the person in the room is setting the tone for. So anyways, I'm happy to hear from other people. I just know from personal experience, and also just made me think back to Luisa's advice last week.
we were actually having this conversation because I'm part of mastery learning and grading accreditation that's happening at our school. So we were having this conversation, which was really weird because undermatching came up in two aspects of my life that I did not know were going to collide that same week. But we were talking about how we can better bridge the gap between high school, a 2-year college, and eventually a 4-year, or high school to 4-year. And something that kept coming up was, how do we get students to ask for help? Because they've, it's hard. And I have students who kind of just look at me and they want to ask for help, but they don't know how to do so even in like their own community, in my own classroom. And I started to realize that I was one of those students. I got into UCLA right out of high school, and I thought it was going to be, just another school. I didn't know what it meant to go into higher education. I was the first one in my family to do so, and I kind of just winged it until I started failing all of my classes my first quarter. And there's nothing better than to go to your really, high expecting mom and say, hey, I'm failing every class and I don't know what I'm doing. And it was a really hard pill to swallow, but it was the first time that I took tutoring. It was the first time that I sought a counselor. But I was 18 years old and I had never had to do that before. So now in class, I do exactly what Jerome said. I kind of put it out there, and it's a blanket statement to everybody. These are the resources I can give you. This is where we're going to be at. And we need to be comfortable with getting a little uncomfortable with asking for help. And it's setting this precedent of, if I have to come into office hours, cool, I will be there. I will help you with what you need. And I also practice this in now Zooming, because our chats have our names. So if you don't want to put a chat, I actually have a Jamboard where you can just pop a sticky, and it's a bike rack. So if you have a question, it's on one side of my screen, it pops up. Usually it's anonymous narwhal or whatever, so I don't know who's putting it. But it's helped a lot with bridging some of those questions that students might have during class. And I'm noticing that the more anonymous it can get, sometimes the better. They have the option of like writing their name at the bottom, but that's only if they really feel like that is something they want to have me just fully address.
Well, and I think this group has really encouraged me to continue to be that bridge the last year in a way that I never had before. Like I have these kids that I love, and I've helped, and I've written letters for, and I've spent time with, and I give them to the university, and then I take my next batch. And I'm not doing that this year. Like, I've been reaching out to kids all year long, and they're now reaching back out to me and saying, hey, I need help with, and I've got this scholarship opportunity. Can you help me write this? And so I think that's one thing that I think we need to explore too, is as teachers, we build such strong relationships with kids, and then we say, yeah, now you're graduated, here's your suitcase, go. But we really spent a lot of time. I teach at a magnet school, and we have really worked hard at identifying kids that would not normally be identified. And they do really well in 7th grade and 8th grade, and then we start to see them fall away. And so we've been having a lot of hard conversations. And when I first started there were a lot of people who said, well, those kids just don't belong here. And I'm like just cringing and saying, if you say the word "those kids" around me again, you probably had better be out of range. I'm just saying, I'm not going to be polite. And we've really started to really address issues, and our conversation was always, they need to come to us and ask for help. You just need to ask, and we kept having that conversation, like, just ask for help. And I'm thinking, they're not going to ask for help. So we really started looking at ways that they can be anonymous, forms where they can just put questions out, and put your name on it if you want to, but if you want it, I'll address you individually if that's best. But then also having early conversations about things like office hours. They don't know what those are.
Yeah.
Office hours, I mean, just to, and one of my kids just reached out and she goes, Mrs. Miller. And I'm like, and she's like, now she calls me Aunt Mrs. Miller. Like, I said, but anyway, I said, you can call me Kate, you graduated. She goes, no, I'll just call you Aunt Mrs. Miller. But she said that I went to office hours thinking there'd be all these people there. I was the only one. And I didn't know what I was supposed to ask or what I was supposed to do. And so then she sat down and just dogged the professor on the test that he had written, that he'd had his TA write, that didn't have any of the homework, none of the questions that they had. And his TA just wrote this question, she goes, why are we being assessed this way? And she goes, I guess I hung around you guys, too much. But it's those kinds of things. It's just the assumption that any kid, I was first gen too on both sides of the family. Any kid really understands those experiences of college is really probably a misnomer. They just don't. And they don't know what questions to ask because they don't know what they know. So
True,
anyway.
but I agree with all of that. And I have to just say, and this is a huge generalization, so shame on me, but it's a generalization based on my experiences directly with students. And I'll just say that you're right. Many students do not know what they're doing, regardless of their background. But the tone of the more advantaged students is, what's wrong with you, professor? You haven't made it clear. And the tone of the less advantaged students is, what's wrong with me? I don't understand. And the response is withdrawal versus approach, right? So the ones who are like, it's your problem, professor, because you're not making it clear to me and I don't understand your syllabus and you got this thing and I need an extension. That's they'll come at you with their questions and they'll get their questions answered. And this is not all students of any subgroup. I'm not generalizing. I'm really not. I'm thinking of specific students that I've had contact with that I can confidently say that has been the pattern in my limited experience. And I teach large introduction to psychology lectures. So I see a big swath of freshmen every year. And my experience has been that there's just a general tendency of students who come with a background that looks more privileged to feel confident coming and asking questions, and sometimes in a tone that I think is a little bit inappropriate personally. And then there's a tendency of other students to kind of withdraw because they just aren't sure if the question is because they don't understand or because it's a good question. And I try to do what Carla was suggesting. I try to start with a blanket, all questions are good questions. And I'm not just saying that, really, if you're confused, it's probably because I said something confusing. So like, let's talk about that and like understand why it was confusing. You're not supposed to get this right away. Like, but there's definitely a difference. And I want to build that bridge. And this is all really helpful thinking about how, but we've got a ways to go.
There's a couple of things that I think about when I think about some of the dynamics around kids asking for help, when they get to college, their freshman year, they're just on campus, that fear and intimidation of never having been on a campus before versus someone who had very early exposure to campus. Maybe they went back for a homecoming game with parents, or, their parents have alumni meetings and all those things, and they go and they have a lot of exposure. So it becomes very at home type of place for them because they're very accustomed to being there versus a student who their first time on campus was when they got there. Like me, my first time on campus was when I arrived for the first, to move in, was move-in day. So, so everybody, you got this range of experiences, but a couple of things comes to mind for me as to the thing around asking for help and all of that. And some of that is tied to culture of classroom when you're on a high school campus, elementary school, middle school, because, if you're in a classroom and you're not raising your hand, you're viewed as not participating.
Right.
You know, if you're not getting the right the right answer, you know, you're kind of shunned because you don't know the answer. It's almost a little bit of an unspoken expectation that you know everything.
For sure.
And so I think, you know, our role as teachers is to create the environment where kids feel like it's okay to get it wrong. When you raise your hand, you do not have to have the right answer. If you feel like it might be the right answer, raise your hand anyway and say it, you know, because it's my job and role to lead you down a path where you arrive at the answer that is best fit for the question. And so, you know, I think part of that is classroom culture that has kind of breeded some of that. So some of that is just not socioeconomic status alone and experience alone and not really knowing and not having knowledge. Some of that is classroom culture that has said, these kids over here know and you don't, and shame on you, versus an environment that says, okay, everybody put your boards up, and then you address the you know, the things that are missed that they didn't get. And hopefully you don't teach it in the same way that you taught it before, because they didn't get it when you taught it that way before. So hopefully you don't make that mistake. And that's where it's on you as a teacher. But I do think that there's something that it comes to that thing of raising your hand. And very early on in some cultural environments in the school, it is the thing, no matter what, you throw that hand in the air. So someone who has had that experience, they come to campus and they throwing that hand up, and everybody else is looking around and saying, she raised her hand one more time. But she from here, he's been taught to throw that hand in the air. And so they're getting the help they need. And so we have to, before the kids get to campus, get them accustomed, you know, of throwing that hand in the air and getting comfortable with that, and making everybody else feel uncomfortable.
So like, maybe it's just as simple as like a summer, like, can't we do that in like a boot camp? And maybe this already exists, Heidi. Like, I don't know what GSP and CSP does in terms of actually bringing kids to campus and for how long, and what do they do? I've never been invited, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but like, you know, what if we did a month-long thing where it's like, you know, you move from module to module and there's a different focus, and then it became nationwide, and every school is a curriculum, right? I mean, this is what's Jerome saying? Tell me. This is a
hidden
course
curriculum.
effort.
So, and we do. So our community scholars come to Georgetown for 5 weeks. They come for summer session too. Okay. And they actually take 6 credits worth of courses at Georgetown, and then there's all of this mentoring around it. And a lot of that is actually about how you exist.
Thank you, Jerome. I did not know this. Okay.
How you exist on a primarily white institution, at an institution with a lot of well-off students, kind of where you find your voice and own it. And I also wanted to bring this back a little bit to kind of your specific expertise. One of the things I think that surprises folks is we have students who are food insecure at Georgetown. And Emily, your story rang really true, because one of the things that students at Georgetown, and turns out to be true of a lot of college campuses, if they're on large scholarships, and most of your kids who've arrived at Georgetown are ones who are on, if not full scholarship, like the majority of it, they can actually reduce their meal plan and recoup that money as cash. So there's like a certain amount that we allocate. And if you sign up for the full meal plan, then all that money goes into the meal plan. And if you opt out for fewer meals, it turns out that money gets deposited in your student account. And you can withdraw that and send it home. So a lot of your kids have been partially responsible for earning money for families. And when they come to Georgetown, that often is challenging because they're also trying desperately. They might be doing work study, but that's money that feeds back into their financial aid system. If they have some extra hours for something, they're often using it so that they're not the only person who can't chip in a few dollars for pizza, sorry, it's like a bad food item. I realize this, Anna, but like in the dorm and stuff like that. So we actually have a problem with food insecurity among Georgetown undergraduates, graduate students, and staff. We also have, even among some of our teaching faculty. Yeah, actually, you can't do this as a first-year student. They like don't trust first-year students further than we can throw first-year students in terms of having it all figured out. But I'll guarantee our kids a year after you've taught them, we would say they don't make wise choices for their own nutrition, but they're making choices for their families, right? Kind of financial security. So I think, Anna, so a question I think that we always struggle with, and I'm sure teachers on the screen struggle with too, is that it's one thing talking about the subject that you're supposed to be interacting with them about, like the academics, like let's talk about the academics. But a lot of these kids are ones that we also want to be able to reach out to about the larger challenges in their lives. Where do we start some of those conversations with you work with younger kids, so with families even, where do we start with kids to have those conversations about, you know, issues that aren't in a sense part of the teacher's job, right? To kind of make sure the students are academically engaged.
Well, I mean, don't we call that social emotional learning in lower levels? I mean, it's that we have to get all that, right? I know the elementary school seems to be very, very good at social emotional learning, and high schoolers, you know, it's something we've been grappling with at my school the last couple of years. How do we do good social emotional learning? Because yeah, it's not part of the history classroom, right? But it's so important for every other aspect. I don't have any answer, but it's just like you said that, and I was like, social emotional learning, like it's got to continue through college as well. So, sorry, really quick question related to what you were saying about the food insecurity at Georgetown. Do you know what percentage of your students work part-time during college? I mean, are there students that have been, you know, giving up part of their food benefit to send money back home, but also working and combining a full student load? Because that seems like a combination too. That would be, if I can work and send money back home as well.
Yeah, those are numbers that we have a hard time tracking, Tanya, and we've tried. So we know how many hours they're working when it's campus jobs, right? That we carefully track. So we know federal work study hours, and there's a system called Hoya Works that like all on-campus jobs run through, and it caps at a certain number of hours, and it caps at a certain number of hours because we try to ensure that students aren't overworking. So then they head out into the local community and work shifts at name food restaurants, name clothing restaurants. Georgetown is very, if you haven't been to that part of DC before, it's a very shishi part of DC, like none of us really shop there, part of DC. But they'll take a lot of those jobs. Those are really hard to track. So there's been some surveys worked on it. We've done some surveys around food insecurity at Georgetown, but they are
the food insecurity
harder.
Rates are high.
Yeah, the food insecurity rates are challenging. And there's just been a lot of discussions about how we broach those conversations that really, again, help students, or sorry, can exacerbate students' feeling of a sense of belonging in kind of places of privilege.
I don't have a good answer about the, like, how do you reach students to support things that are not necessarily the explicit goal of what they're supposed to get from your class. You know, like, I would love, you know, we're supposed to start, I don't know if this is a college-wide, I'm revealing so much of my things I don't know here, but I don't know if there's a college-wide standard, but at least in our department, we must have a statement on the front of our syllabus that states the learning goals of the class. Here's what you're going to have at the end of this semester. And I've always been told from the first semester I started teaching at Georgetown that I have to start with that. I think it'd be pretty sweet if we had here are my goals for you as a person. I mean, cura personalis, that's, you know, the whole person at Georgetown, right? So like, shouldn't we at least start with a statement about, you know, what we want for our students as humans, and not just what I want for you to get out of my class? But like, my syllabus is already like 9,000 pages long, and so I don't even know if that would be welcome. But that's another way of doing, I think, what Carla suggested, which is like starting with a open, no judgment, you know, statement of like, here's what I aim to do, here's how some ways we can do it, here's who I am, I welcome any of you regardless of, you know, how you identify, see yourself, what you perceive your needs to be, you know, to come and talk about those things, or recognize that, you know, all questions are welcome and all perspectives are valued. And I mean, there's so many different, you know, those kinds of statements, I guess, are more common, the latter. But
Anna, is your sense from, I think probably both of us could speak to Georgetown, but is your sense from the research that how public some of these conversations have become? I mean, one thing that the pandemic has done is it's both exacerbated the problems, but it's also often stripped away that veneer of invisibility to folks who were kind of basking in their privilege and not really looking for this. I mean, I can say at Georgetown, the number of faculty who are basically somewhere along the spectrum of like, wow, there are poor kids on our campus, you know, and you're just like, where have you been all these years, folks? But like, you know, I like my students are home and apparently their family is struggling at home with food security issues. And you're like, their family's been struggling the whole time. It's just now that they're home and that veneer's pulled away. And it's just all over the news, right? Kind of the challenges that are being faced. Is your sense, Anna, that any of the solutions that we're finding in this year, because you talked about food insecurity going way up through the roof, and then like the school stepped in and the food insecurity dropped off. Are those solutions from a policy perspective that we can look to being part of the future? Or are we going to go back to how it was before?
I mean, I am really hopeful, and, you know, we live in DC, so we have such an up close view of politics, but I'm hopeful. The current administration seems very committed to a very broad expansion of the social safety net, including, you know, tax credits for families with young children, which essentially is a cash benefit, and expanded food assistance. So this idea of what Tanya mentioned, that they're going to strip away the vouchers that they gave to high school students, seems to be working at cross purposes with what the rest of the administration is saying about other social programs. I would like to see, I would guess that some of these things are going to stay, like more generous food benefits, a move away from where the last administration was headed, which was, you know, very punitive and requiring that parents prove work status in order to get a food benefit, which it, you know, had not been conditioned on work before that, particularly parents of young children. So I'm hopeful that we've gone away from that, and that somehow this administration will figure out how to make that hard to undo. But I do think that if there's a silver lining to this pandemic, particularly for vulnerable low-income households, it is that it has made things that some of us always knew were there much more visible. And it has made it clear that some of these problems cannot be solved, but some Band-Aids can be applied more effectively. And so I think that, you know, what we saw in Pennsylvania and Oklahoma, that the food insecurity rates went up and then went down once schools figured out how to get food to families. It's like, it really is that simple. It really is that, like, what do you do to solve food insecurity? You provide food. It's not complicated, you know? So it's like, you just have to make sure the households have food. And then I think there's a lot of questions I was scrolling up in the chat about nutritional content, not just how do you get kids to eat more healthy, which was Ryan's question, but also Heidi and some others chimed in with questions about, you know, like, what is the nutritional content of school lunches and school provided food? And someone mentioned, I forget who, about, you know, Michelle Obama's initiative to increase the nutritional value of school provided food. So a lot of those things are like valid questions. And I would say that, you know, we can solve some of those problems by trying to do what this program in Pennsylvania is doing, which is provide not just shelf stable processed food items, but a mix of fresh food and, you know, whole grain cereals. Like, when they do send cereal home, this particular program, they make sure that it is a whole grain cereal that has low sugar content, and is going to, you know, hopefully fuel the kids to get through their day of learning more than something that would just be a, you know, high burnout rate of, you know, calories. So I think that to the extent that those two things merge, where like it becomes clear that providing more food assistance gives families more food, and then the content of that food becomes a mix of things that are fresh and things that are more shelf stable just to meet families' needs. And again, Heidi, you mentioned the time, you know, allocation required to prepare food. So like that is a real constraint for families who are working multiple jobs or split shifts, or have got to pick up this kid from here and there and have grandma to take care of. And I mean, there's a lot going on in a lot of these households. So yeah, I think that's the answer. Is I think that this has done good things in terms of visibility, and it remains to be seen whether it will translate into more benefits for healthy foods that families can actually do something with.
And I have a question, and thinking about just your expertise and your research and how that may be applicable or directly useful for some of the teachers here. I know with your research, you say you've worked predominantly more with younger students and younger populations, so more so like the early childhood stages. And clearly from the research you're currently doing, there's a lot of work with the students and their families. I want to know this from your experience, has there been any kind of direct interactions with teachers, even though they teach a younger population? And is there any kind of learnings from those interactions with those teachers that might be applicable to our teachers here? And the reason why I asked it in that way is because when we think about undermatching, it's such a wide problem, right? And we see the Pivotal Network as being this place that kind of pulls in all the people who are in this fight in interesting ways. And I think about the same thing is applicable with food insecurity as it relates to the development of our youth. And so anyways, all that being said, I was curious if there's anything from your interactions with teachers that may be applicable here or some lessons learned.
I mean, I think, so one thing I was trying to say in the beginning, and I'm not sure how clearly I said it, is just that what I've become more interested in recently in kind of many ways is teacher well-being, because teachers are like the second most important caregivers in the lives of these children after their parents. And then also this idea that, you know, we should be this is my most recent revelation, just in like the last 2 years, that like, if I want to build this bridge, like we're all partners, like we're all in this together, like you're handing off your babies to us and we're like helping grow them at the next stage. And I've always just thought about early childhood and there's this gap in between, but actually those children, if they grow up, are going to be the same kids that I interact with as first generation scholars at Georgetown. So I've become very interested in like teacher well-being from those perspectives, but you know, I think that in terms of like specific interactions with teachers, so that's kind of like my million miles above the ground perspective on, you know, how teachers link to my own research and kind of like interests, and how we're all kind of in this together at different stages. Like we're all seeing the same kids at different points in time, I guess is the point. But also, so we have done some very specific surveys of teachers. Again, they are elementary school teachers. So we've interviewed the teachers who teach the kids in our sample every year since we started with our research. And that was in 2016 when the kids were 3. So we caught the preschool teachers and we followed the kids into their second year of preschool and then into kindergarten, first grade, now they're in second grade. And so we've done a lot of research on the teachers themselves at this point, as on the assumption that teachers are kind of like the engines of student learning. Like they are the ones, to the extent that anything good happens to these kids in school, you know, like second to the parents, these are the key drivers of that experience. And in many cases, I don't mean second ranked, I just mean alongside parents. And so we've done a lot of work on teachers, and what we've asked teachers a lot of the same questions we ask parents. We ask teachers about, do you have a second job? What's your work schedule? We ask teachers about their own food insecurity. We ask teachers about their ability to afford like basic medical care. We ask teachers about benefits they receive, like, you know, income tested benefits, so food stamps and welfare, Medicaid, things like that, housing assistance. We ask them about their stress. We give them a depression inventory, a stress inventory, and I'm trying to think about other like household kind of things, like the same things we've been asking parents to understand children's home environments. And what we've learned is that, and this is kind of where I started, like teachers and many of these teachers are parents. And because the teaching salary is not a living wage in many cases, these teachers are low income parents. So many of them experience food insecurity, like 25 or 26%. So these are full-time lead teachers in a large urban public school district. We sampled all the teachers at grade level. So we have 156. Tulsa Public Schools is a very big district. So we have like 156 second grade teachers. That's all the second grade teachers in the district. Because they all serve low income kids. Like we followed our kids into classrooms and that's where they go. Every single school is a Title I. Every elementary school is a Title I school. So we learned a lot about the teachers, and I guess, you know, what we learned in many cases, and so we do a lot of other kinds of research that's probably like beyond the scope of this conversation, but just really quickly, we do these really in-depth classroom observations. We have trained data collectors out there in Oklahoma who do classroom observations for hours and hours and hours of the classroom using these well-validated research tools that measure instructional quality in elementary school teachers. And what we looked at was, you know, how does the teacher's own level of stress, like economic stress, food insecurity, mental stress, how do those things predict the teacher's instructional quality, and that's what the tool calls it, in the classroom? And they're not related. And what I think is fascinating about that is that the teachers are absorbing it. They are just taking it and not transmitting it to the kids. The teachers have incredibly high rates of stress. They have 25, their rates of food insecurity are higher than the national average for adults. So they're disproportionately experiencing food insecurity. They're disproportionately experiencing depression. They're disproportionately experiencing mental distress, and yet it does not tank their instructional quality in the classroom. And this is just mind-blowing to me, because what you see with parents, there's decades of developmental psychology literature suggesting, there's a whole model called the family stress model, where we see that low-income parents tend to be what? More irritable, more frustrated, less warm and sensitive, less responsive. Being stressed out affects parenting negatively. But for these teachers in this sample in Tulsa, Oklahoma, experiencing these stressors did not meaningfully negatively impact their classroom instructional quality. And I mean, you guys, I don't want to make any assumptions about, I've talked to the teachers in our sample, obviously, you know, anonymously, I invite them to share kind of qualitative interpretation. And I told them, you know, what I'm seeing here is that you are really, really distressed, and yet you are not letting it invade your classroom behavior. And that's just mind-blowing to me. Like, I'm a parent of young children, and when I'm stressed, my kids definitely feel it. And I cannot imagine absorbing that. But that seems to be what's going on. I have no other explanation for that empirical finding.
And that's holding up even during the pandemic.
Well, we can't do any observation. There's no in-person data collection during the pandemic. So schools were remote for almost a year in Tulsa. Tulsa Public Schools kept kids remote. They didn't even do hybrid with little kids until last month. And when they opened back up for in-person instruction, they have forbidden understandably, research personnel in school buildings. So we haven't been able to do that. So that was from when they were in first grade, which was last year. We did our data collection and completed it right before COVID closed schools. But that's something we saw when they were in pre-K. It's something we saw when they were in kindergarten. So it's a pretty consistent finding in this particular area. It's totally possible. I mean, I won't get into like the boring like psychometrics of like how we measure quality in classrooms, but like maybe the quality measurement tools aren't maybe they're noisy, maybe they're blunt, maybe our measures aren't very good. Like maybe we're using a yardstick that has unevenly hatched lines and calling it inches, and it's not actually inches, and that would mean that it's not a very good tool. And so maybe we're not measuring instructional quality well, and so there's no association between stress and instructional quality because we're not actually measuring instructional quality very well. But I mean, these tools have been very widely used for many, many years by many, many researchers. So I'm going to say that's not probably what's going on.
But I do think, Anna, that there are a lot of us, and maybe some of us on the line. I'll testify if nobody else will. I've been poor as a teacher. You get paid. We call it teacher rich, and then all the rest of the money's gone by the time you pay bills and all those things, and you experience the stress from that. And but I think that over the years, you just learn to work to make sure that your students are not impacted by whatever it is that's going on with you, that they don't feel it. The other thing that comes into play for me, because I've always been in Title I schools, there's never been a time in my career that I've not been in a school that would have been before they had Title I, and then after that, I wasn't in a Title I school. And I think, I don't know if it's a good art or whatever, but we've learned the art of ensuring that, because we know that the students are experiencing these stresses, that we don't want to bring our stress in and add on. So we tried to create classroom environments and environments that make it so that they want to learn, that puts them in a better position to learn. We don't want them to experience with us what they experience sometimes at home. It's not for everybody, but we do know that we have some of our kids who do have strenuous situations at home. And so if we bring our own personal thing into it, we know that that could trigger kids, that it could change the classroom learning dynamic. I've seen it happen. I've seen it in my classroom. I saw it when I was partnering with teachers a lot in Chicago, with threw the whole classroom dynamic off. Next thing you know, kids are popping off, they're going off, they're walking out, all these things that come into play when you're dealing with Title I dynamics. And I'm not saying that's the case for every Title I school, but I just know the ones that I have been in that, you know, that when kids feel your stress, and they tend to take it on in a different way, and that can change the learning environment for everybody. So we learn the art of, in a sense of de-escalation in our methods and how we deal with students, how we encounter them, how we build them, how we even greet them when they come across the threshold. You know, that whole TLAC thing, standing at the door, is huge for us who are in Title I schools, because we're able to see the kids' emotions as they're coming down the hallway. We can tell if they started off rough with some friends, if they had an argument with their BFF, to, you know, something must have happened at the house, and we can look at that all the way in the hallway, and I can make sure that that does not enter my room. But if I bring my own stresses of what it means to be a teacher who does not make a whole bunch of money and all those things into that, that could make for an environment in your classroom where kids are not learning. And so I think we much prefer in our careers that we have a situation where there's something good happening. So we may not make a whole bunch of money, but we are impacting lives and changing lives, and
for sure
what we call here is pivotal. So that's my testimony.
Well, thank you for that. And that is helpful, because I'm so careful, as you were also in your comments, to not say all this, all that, right? We don't know anything about all. We know about ourselves and the people that we've had direct contact with. But, you know, this is what I've heard from the teachers that I've spoken with, and you're saying that resonates with you as well. And, you know, it was a really tricky little needle to thread, because as a policy researcher, who tries to publicize my research so that it will actually affect policy, which is the goal of the whole darn thing. You know, I try to end my research articles with implications. You know, what does this mean? What are policymakers supposed to do with this? And I was so worried about this, because I didn't want people to say, well, good, great, teachers can be as stressed as possible, but look, it doesn't affect their instructional quality, so no problem. So I went on this whole thing about, you know, from a human rights and a gender equity perspective, we have to lift teachers up. Like, this is ridiculous. Teachers with full-time, as someone just said in the comments, full-time jobs, as the partners with parents in launching children on their own life trajectories, you know, must be paid minimally a living wage, you would hope, you know, scaled for the cost of living in that area, not just some like made up number that someone decided was the right number. So I think that is real. And, you know, we did this newsletter that we sent out to all of our teachers. We do it every year when we finish these research results. We do like the research version that goes to the research people, and then we do a teacher version and we send a newsletter to them. And one of the findings was that none of the teachers in our sample reported using food stamps. And we put that in a little infographic in the teacher newsletter. partly because I was interested to see if anyone would write back to me. And one teacher wrote back to me and said, I want you to change that, because I don't want you to say that none of the teachers used food stamps because they didn't. It makes it sound like we don't need them. We need them. We don't qualify. Our income is just too high. So the rates of food insecurity are very high, and the rates of food stamp receipt were 0. And she was like, I want you to fix that, because I don't want to see that. That's not true for me. She was like, my colleagues, like, we qualify. I mean, we need it and we can't get it. So like, that's really important information for policymakers and people who care about people.
Regretfully, I'm looking at the clock here and I'm realizing that we should let everybody go. All of you, thank you for joining us. And Anna, thank you for joining us. But Anna, I'm pretty sure we're just going to put you on our permanent mailing list. Because now I think you're just one of us. And my guess is that we and you would both enjoy kind of continuing on with this conversation. But I think particularly this last point, thinking about kind of the role of teachers and just seeing themselves as kind of needing to absorb that stress so that it doesn't spill into their kids' lives is profound, and is one of the reasons we're here with the Pivotal Network, is to try and figure out how to kind of elevate and support these really outstanding educators. So
I know, and I want to ask
today
for all kinds of tips and all kinds of things. And I recognize, just as in, anti-racism work, it's not the job of Black and brown people to teach us. We've burdened communities enough. It's our job to do the work. I feel the same way about teachers. Like, I don't want to go back to that teacher who wrote to me about the newsletter. I wrote back and I said, thank you, and I will correct that. What I wanted to do was, can we have a Zoom chat and you can tell me everything that I can do? It's like, she does not need that in her life. She does not need to spend more time teaching me how to help her. I need to figure out how to help in a different way. And so this is a really valuable network, but I'm also cognizant that, like, y'all are teachers and I don't want to burden you with those questions as well.
I think just everything that we discussed tonight has captured the true essence of what we are, who we are. Tanya, I hope you really got a sense of the Pivotal Network after tonight. And yeah, we are all partners. I think that's one of the most powerful takeaways that I'm taking from this conversation. And I'm just really appreciative. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, well, keep me looped in as much as I can serve you. I'm interested to do that. I know you have a lot on your plate, but
no, and
yeah.
Heidi, I think you muted yourself.
Oops, sorry. The coming weeks are promising to be good and very interesting ones.
Yeah.
Carla, I'm super glad you joined us today too. And all the old hands, we just love always seeing you also. So, Anna, thank you so much and take care, everybody.
It was so nice to meet you all. Thank you. Thank you for your time and your knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.